Hey guys, this is a video to kind of go over the answers to that review assignment so that if you had it wrong, you are not going into the test thinking that you were right. So just kind of go through every question and talk about what the best answer was. This is one of those terms that we've used 100 times, but if you go away from it a while, sometimes your brain lets you forget. All the individuals of a single species in a certain area has got to be the old population, right? So we could have a population of squirrels, a population of bacteria, a population of sea crabs, whatever, right? All the individuals of one species in a certain area. Next we're talking about all the alleles. So in a certain population, all of the alleles that they have, okay, all of the possible alleles that could go on to the next generation you could think of, and that's going to be your gene pool. Okay, I could see why you might be pulled to allele pool, but that is not the word that is used. And it maybe would make more sense, but again, I don't get to make those kinds of choices. Which of the following is not like the rest? So we're looking for the one that is not in the same category as all the rest. So let's look at our choices here. So we have breed, strain, variety, and behavior. Okay, so I know, hopefully, that 3 of these are types or ways that we can describe a subspecies. Okay, so a breed is a subspecies, a strain is a subspecies, a variety is a subspecies. And this is a confusing one because you could also think of variety as like variation, right? But in especially plants, like for example, tomatoes, I'm familiar with a few, so I'll use tomatoes. They call varieties the different types. So there's like Beefmaster is a variety of tomato, or Roma is a variety of tomato. And they're kind of make different shaped tomatoes, and this one's Beefmaster. Their big thing is that they have more of like the part of the tomato you actually want to eat. But they're still tomatoes. They're still the same species of plant, but they call them varieties. So all 3 of those are types of subspecies, so behavior does not match. All right, 4, when a population's allele frequency changes due to random chance. Okay, anytime you see random chance, best answer is going to be genetic drift. Okay, founder effect, to be fair, is a type of genetic drift. Okay, but it's kind of a more specific. So it's the specific random chance of that the alleles of your founders are going to be passed on to other generations. But it's more specific. If you don't talk about in the description, due to the population being settled by a small group, then it's going to be genetic drift. But it says anything about, the founders or being a population being started by a small group, then you're thinking founder effect. All right, if 2 organisms look different, they must be different species. Okay. I would argue that a Chihuahua and Irish Wolfhound don't look the same, right? They have traits in common, but they definitely look different, right? And hopefully we know that they're the same species. They must be different species, so that is false. Okay, a more natural example, because, dogs have kind of been shaped by human hand, but a more natural example is maybe think about birds. Okay, so I'll even go more specific. I'll go cardinals. People are kind of familiar with what a cardinal looks like. So the male cardinal is bright red. Then he's got a kind of a flourishy little feather off the back of his head, whereas the female is brown, maybe a little bit red in a few places. But for the most part, they're kind of brownish, okay? And so they don't really look alike, but they're the same species, okay? They're just different, shapes and colors, okay? A lot of species have this kind of slight difference in appearance between males and females, even humans, right? And so just because 2 organisms look different, they must be different species. It's got to be false. Population gene pools are more stable if the population is large. Okay, and this is because a small population, I would say, is more vulnerable to genetic drift. Okay, so again, I always kind of think about random chance as genetic drift. So, you know, it's possible if I just roll a dice twice, I might get 1, 2 times, both times. Okay, but if I have a larger sample size, a larger population of dice rolls, and I roll a dice 1,000 times, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to get 1 every time, right? And so it's just kind of the idea that the larger your sample, the larger your population, the more things kind of even out. Okay, where if you have a small population, random chance kind of can be a bigger player. All right, 7, traits that an organism acquire, which just means get, right, during its lifetime can be passed to offspring. This is false. This would be Lamarck's theory. All right, I'm going to say idea. It's incorrect, but it was a theory at the time. But remember, he said that species evolve because, you know, each generation either works really hard to improve a certain body part or uses it more than something else, and so it gets a little bit bigger or gets a little bit better or gets whatever characteristic that's better, and then they can pass it to their offspring. But that's not true. Okay, it's only about the genes. They don't get their genes during their lifetime, right? You don't get your genes during your lifetime. You get your genes at the beginning of your life, right? You don't acquire them after you are born. All right, an organism's ability to survive and reproduce is called fitness. Okay, and that's kind of a key term in evolutionary biology. 9, when some members of a population are more fit, there's that word we just had, and so their genes get passed on. What do we call that? What is happening? And that is natural selection. Okay, so the selection part is that they get to reproduce and their genes get passed on. They are selected by nature to get to pass on their genes. All right, 10. Conditions necessary for gene frequencies to remain constant, aka B and Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, include all of the following except. Okay, that's one of them. Mating is random. There are no mutations. That's one of them. Population is small. There's our answer. And there's no migration. That's one of them. Remember, so population is large. Oops. Is one. And the last one is there are organisms of equal fitness. AKA, there's not really natural selection happening because, remember, natural selection selects for the most fit. If they're all equally fit, there's no natural selection. All right, 11. The prevalence of a certain allele or trait is its frequency. This is generally expressed as a decimal rather than a percentage. If you put it as a percentage, it doesn't really matter too much. As long as you put a percentage sign at the end, then we know you're talking about a percentage. Populations tend to have the same allele frequencies as the original members of the species to colonize an area. There's some of those buzzwords I just talked about on the last one. Remember, that is the founder effect. Over time, if two populations are, best word would be isolated. If you put separated, that's okay. But they can be isolated somehow, right? We had by time, which is called temporal isolation, geography, or behavior. They may accumulate differences and become separate species. Isolation before mating. We have a prefix that means before, and that's pre. Okay, so before, and after they mate, they would produce a zygote. So pre-zygotic would be before they even make a zygote, and after the production of a zygote would be post, after zygotic. All right, 15. If the environment changes quickly, evolution has to speed up to keep the species alive. This faster rate, I didn't leave myself enough room to write it out this way, punctuated equilibrium. Oops. All right. If a stable environment, so this would be kind of the opposite. So if the environment's changing quickly, we have to have fast evolution to keep up. If the environment is kind of stable, we can have very slow, steady evolution, and that would be gradualism. Okay. Species that develop during periods of punctuated equilibrium would not be expected to have many fossils. So this is happening really, really fast, or really, really fast for evolution, which is still pretty slow, but much faster than this one. Okay, so would not be expected to have many fossils to show changes. And that would be true. Remember, a very, very small percentage of organisms that live and die get fossilized. And of those that are fossilized, how many do you think humans have found? A very small amount, right? So if evolution's happening pretty fast, we might not have evidence of all of those changes every step along the way, I guess I would say. Because most of the ones that lived and died don't become fossilized, and most of the ones that become fossilized haven't been found yet. All right, Stanley Miller performed an experiment that showed life originated on Earth. No. Okay, we don't know that. They've also found some of those, molecules of life on things like meteors and things, so they don't know. Okay, life originated outer space. We don't know that either, right? Remember, an experiment can maybe be used to hypothesize some of these things, but it only directly shows what it directly shows. Okay, organic molecules like amino acids could form in early Earth conditions. Well, that's exactly what he did. Right? He formed early Earth conditions and saw that some organic molecules like amino acids were made. And mitochondria were free-living organisms that were enveloped by larger cells. Remember, that is the endosymbiotic theory, which is not in this chapter, but we learned about it last year. But not to do with Stanley Miller's experiment, so not the correct answer here. All right, 19. Branching tree diagrams that show evolutionary relationships are those phylogenetic trees. You did those practice trees, and there was one in our notes about primates and things. The term wasn't in the notes filled in, but if you watch the video, we did write that in there. A species that diverged to create multiple species is called the common ancestor. You might also see shared ancestor depending on what source you're looking at. So common ancestor or shared ancestor would both be okay. 21. Species filling similar niches may develop similar traits. This is called convergent evolution. Okay. And again, I would kind of want to point out convergent evolution is the process, but I would call the species themselves, right, ecological equivalence. Okay, so something to think about, the process versus what do we call the species that have those similarities. And the last one, through adaptive blank, a single species may diversify into many species to fill available niches. That would be radiation, which is kind of a synonym for divergent evolution. But since I put adaptive there, radiation is really the only word that fits into the blank. All right, so that hopefully answers any questions you had about the review. Good luck on the test.